Okay guys, this is a little video to help you complete your study guide for Unit 2 test, which will be on Tuesday. The video is in 3 parts. You have Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. The reason why it's in 3 parts is YouTube will not allow me to upload a video longer than 15 minutes, and this will be a little longer than 15 minutes, but hopefully this helps. So the first topic on your study guide, or first vocabulary term, is this topic of monopoly and what a monopoly is. Okay, monopoly is a type of economic system, okay, or a market. In a monopoly, you only have one producer that produces each item. Okay, for example, take tennis shoes. Okay, we're going to use tennis shoes a few times in this video. Nike would be the only company that makes tennis shoes. So basically, what Nike could do is then charge whatever they wanted for those tennis shoes. If they wanted to limit how much they produced of an item, they could. If they wanted to create shortages or surpluses, they could. This is why monopolies are usually viewed as bad things, specifically in the U.S. If you go back in history, you look at monopolies, companies like Standard Oil. Okay, Standard Oil has a very negative image because they were a monopoly. Okay, the reason why is they controlled the price of that product and also how much that product they produced. From my experience, besides Standard Oil, modern monopolies are very rare. The closest thing I can get to a monopoly, it's not really a monopoly, it's what we call a near monopoly. A near monopoly would be like a water company. Most towns only have one water company. For example, they wouldn't have 2 or 3 because, well, there's no need for it. They don't really gouge prices either. No, a lot of times we hear monopolies, we think just raising prices to raise prices. Now, water companies aren't going to do that. It's a need, so they're going to keep prices kind of low just to try to help people out. Also, they're regulated, so that may have a big reason to do why they don't increase their prices. As we go through this video, guys, as you can see, I'm kind of talking over notes I've written before. So sometimes the audio might get off. For example, I might still be talking about a subject while it switches slides. That's fine. Feel free to pause, fast forward, rewind as much as you need. So with that in mind, let's go to the next section, which is voluntary exchange was the next idea we talked about. Voluntary exchange basically says that no one forces you to buy or sell anything. Okay, this is the basic idea of the U.S. economy. You're not forced into any transaction. No one comes to you during the school day and says, you have to go buy a bag of Cheetos right now. Okay, you're given that option, and in some cases you're not given the option, but no one forces you to do that. Okay, you're not forced into any transaction. All transactions or exchanges are completely voluntary. You do it on your own free will. With that in mind, sellers, part of this voluntary exchanges, you're free to produce whatever you want as long as it is within the legal limits of the law. For example, if you decide you want to make tennis shoes, nobody's going to come to you and say you can't make tennis shoes because you just can't. That doesn't happen in the U.S., and specifically in voluntary exchange. With that in mind, also, buyers are free to buy whatever they want. You can consume whatever you would like to consume. Okay, you can purchase whatever. Once again, as long as within the legal limits. Okay, so take a second, get these down, get the idea of voluntary exchange through your head. Not a real complex idea, but take just a second to finish getting this down. Okay, the next topic is the division of labor. Now, division of labor is something we talked about in the last unit, so you should be extremely familiar with it, and this should really only be a review. Now, remember, guys, on your test from now on, there will be review questions, which a review question basically just means it was something we talked about in the last unit. Now, division of labor will be on your test. Okay, division of labor means splitting work into smaller, more manageable tasks. For example, take the assembly line, which we're going to talk about here in a second. That is division of labor. You're splitting the work into smaller tasks. One person does one thing, the next person does the next, and someone else does the third thing. The reason why they do this is it increases specialization. You become an expert at doing your one task, whatever that one task may be. If you take Volkswagen, your job's putting the brakes on the cars. You become an expert at putting brakes on cars. Now, you may not be good at putting windshields in, but the person next to you is putting the windshields in, and they become an expert. This is division of labor. Okay. This concept was kind of created, put down in writing by a guy named Adam Smith. Okay, Adam Smith, we'll talk about later, is the father of the U.S. economy. Okay, he's the father of what we call the market or capitalist economy. He wrote a book called Wealth of Nations, which deals with this idea of specialization, division of labor, and the U.S. capitalist economy. Okay, and like I said again here, you can see on the bottom, assembly line is the big example of this. The assembly line, of course, we all know was created by Henry Ford, used first on his production of his Model T Fords. Remember, the assembly line increased production greatly because it led to a huge production in product or huge increase in productivity, which we'll talk about, but you should already understand. Okay, so let's jump now to the three types of businesses in the U.S. that we're really going to focus on. The first is the sole proprietorship. Okay, sole proprietorship is a business owned and ran by one person. I know what you're thinking. How can one person run a business? It's very simple. Okay, these aren't usually very big businesses. They're small business. If you think of local restaurants, those are the best examples of sole proprietorship. Take, for example, Land's Bakery right down the street. Okay, that is a sole proprietorship. One person owns and runs that restaurant or that bakery. With this in mind, it is the most common business type in the U.S. Most businesses are sole proprietorships. When you hear people on TV talk about small business, this is what they're referring to. They're referring to sole proprietorships. Okay, it is a big deal to run a sole proprietorship. It's difficult, time-consuming, and we're going to look later at some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. But right now, we really just want to get the definitions of what they are. So, a sole proprietorship, business owned and ran by one person. Second type of business is a partnership. Okay, a partnership is when two or more people, key being on two or more. It can be more than two. It can be 3, 4, 5, 20. Basically, all it is two or more people running and owning a business. Okay, they start it, they run it all by themselves. Okay, this business is not incorporated. That's what makes it not a corporation. Stock is not sold in a partnership. Partnerships you don't hear about a lot, is because it's difficult to run a partnership. The reason is it's difficult to get along with people in a business setting. Okay, just like when you do group work in a classroom, it's difficult to get along with each other. You know, maybe you don't have the same ideas, or you don't think y'all should do the product, create a product the same way. Same way with business, even more so because you're dealing with money, and people and their money are usually kind of weary of each other. Okay, so partnerships. The last type of business is a corporation. Okay, now corporation is the big business. It deals with stockholders. A corporation is owned by many stockholders. Now, stockholders could be hundreds, thousands, millions. In case of big businesses, you think of a company like Facebook. There are millions of stockholders in Facebook. Okay, does that mean they all have an equal say? No. Okay, depending on how much stock you own in a company will decide how much say you have. But a corporation is made up of stockholders. And a stock is just a certificate of ownership. Basically, it's a piece of paper saying you own a certain percent of a company, and as a result, you get the benefits of the owner. For example, if the company makes money, you make money. If the company loses money, you lose money. Now, you can only lose in a corporation what you put in. Okay, so it's a little less risky than a sole proprietorship or partnership. But the big thing is here, and as you can see, I've already messed up. Corporations are used most often in order to make money for the business. Okay, they're used to raise funds quickly. Buying stock is a quick way for businesses to make a lot of money. Okay, so let's cover real fast. I'm not going to talk much during this because we've already talked about it a lot. So specialization, we talked about it a second ago when we did division of labor. Specialization is just the act of practicing one task in order to improve efficiency. So you do one thing over and over and over, you get very efficient at it. For example, writing. That's something simple, writing. When you're in kindergarten, writing is very difficult. You practice that over and over and over and over, and eventually you get very good at it. Later on, when you get jobs, when you start specializing in a task, you know, whether it be teaching, nursing, welding, anything, you become better at it than you were at the beginning because of specialization. Okay, the big idea of specialization is, of course, increasing productivity. Productivity, remember, is the relationship between inputs and outputs. You want your inputs to be less than your outputs. What that means is dollar-wise. You want to input less money than you get out of the company. Because if you're inputting more than you're getting out, you're not making any money, and then your business is not doing well. Okay, so that's the big thing for specialization. Elasticity was the next key term on your sheet. Elasticity was a difficult concept for a lot of you guys, and I understand. But hopefully now that we've been over it a few times, this makes a lot more sense. So first, elasticity is basically all it is in supply and demand is how much a change in price affects supply or demand. Now we said every time price changes, supply or demand is going to change as well. But basically how much it's going to change depends on that product's elasticity. Okay, think about it like a rubber band. You can stretch a rubber band out a long way, it becomes really elastic. Okay, that's elastic. If it's kind of straight, just laying there, it's inelastic, and then inelastic is kind of just proportional. Okay, so all price change is going to affect it, but how much it affects it is what this concept of elasticity is. Now we're going to talk a lot more later, and actually here in a second, about what elastic, inelastic, and uninelastic are. So right now use this time to kind of get these ideas down and get ready before we talk about elasticity here in about 3 seconds. Okay, I know that was a little longer than 3 seconds. That's fine. I needed to catch my breath. Talking was starting to wear me out. Okay, first type of elasticity we're going to talk about is this idea of unit elastic. Unit elastic is a proportional change in price. So what happens is, as price changes, you're going to get a proportional change in supply or demand. For example, if our price increased 10%, our demand will decrease 10%. It's going to be identical. Okay, you're going to get the same change in price that you have in supply and demand. If our price increased 10%, our supply will increase 10%. Now remember, that's the law of supply and demand, which we've talked about a little bit, but we will hit on again here in just a minute, so you help you remember it. If you look at this graph here, this is a unit elastic graph. Remember, it's the one that's kind of straight, goes right through the middle of the graph, pretty even through the middle. Okay, the next type of elasticity is inelastic. A product that is inelastic is one that a change in price isn't going to affect supply or demand that much. For example, if you had a 10% decrease in price, you might see a 0.5% increase in demand. That's not very much, okay? But remember, something that's inelastic is something you have to survive. It is a need, okay? Things like insulin, salt, medicine, anything you have to survive is going to be inelastic. Now remember, inelastic graphs tend to be sharper or steeper than other graphs. One thing I do want to clarify with you guys, I don't know if I didn't do a good job explaining it, but a lot of y'all, it seems like, think inelastic graphs go straight up and down. Remember, they will not go straight up and down because every time price changes, supply or demand will change. But if you look at this graph, it does go pretty straight up and down, but there's still some slant to it. There will always be slant because price will change it somewhat, if not greatly, just a little bit. Speaking of great change in supply or demand, this last little bit here is called elastic. Okay, what that means is a change in price leads to a big change in supply and demand. Okay, if you change your price 1%, you might see a 30 or 40% change in supply or demand. Okay, think about things like wants, things you have to have, or do not have to have. I'm sorry. Cars, TVs, Coke, Pepsi, all those are elastic, things you don't necessarily have to have. Okay, this is going to produce a more flat curve. Remember, it's not going to be straight across because price, anytime you do change price, supply or demand will change. Now, it might not change greatly, but it's going to change a little bit. Okay, so this is the graph of that, so hopefully that'll help. Guys, I suggest looking at all three of these graphs together, which we will do later, so that'll hopefully help you understand it. Alright, this is the end of part 1 of the video. We're going to transition to part 2, so hopefully it makes a little sense here. Part 2 will finish our vocab, and then part 3 will hit the point, so be ready.